Hey guys, it's Mike from That's Cool Vintage Collectibles, and today on the show we're going to talk about a band that you've probably never heard of, but were hugely important to the development of hard rock and heavy metal. Stay tuned. So there's a town about half an hour to the west of my town named Oshawa, Ontario, and in that town in 1965 there was a band that formed that would ultimately go on to change music. And they were a bunch of young guys that decided that British rock and British invasion rock was the way to go, and they found an actual British lead singer named Jack London, whose real name was David Martin, and they adopted British accents for the rest of the band. So they faked it, and they faked the look. They started to dress like Beatles, and they started to play clubs as if they were a British band. Capitol Records took notice and signed the band, and the band was called Jack London and the Sparrows, and this is the album that came out in 1965 from Jack London and the Sparrows on Capitol Records. And they were a bit of a fraud, but it worked, and Capitol bought it, and so did the public. And although it didn't sell a lot of copies, it was a major label debut for these guys, and it put them on the map, and it allowed them to play places and play clubs around Ontario. So the university circuit was one place where it started as well for these guys, and they started to play British beat material plus their own originals, which sounds kind of very pop rock, a little bit Zombies, but not quite as complex, and a little bit of the Hollies are in here. But again, the songwriting's not quite up to what those bands were doing, so it's an okay release. But what they became is why this is of significance nowadays. By 1966, the band is starting to put out some singles as well as their albums. And here is one of the early singles called Sparrows and Daisies by Jack London and the Sparrows. Things were going okay. The band's success was so-so. It was, you know, close to home they were successful, but outside of Ontario, not so much. And it was getting to be where things were coming to a head with Jack London, and they didn't want to be a British group anymore. And so he was relieved of his duties, and a fellow by the name of John Kay was brought in to sing and started to play guitar as well in the band. And so at this point, there's a few members that are of importance. Dennis and Jerry Edmonton, that wasn't their real last names, but they went by the stage name Dennis and Jerry Edmonton. And Nick St. Nicholas and John Kay are starting to be kind of a group that is changing direction a little bit, and they decide to try their luck and leave Canada and head to New York City. And in New York, they auditioned for Columbia Records. They did put out one single as the Sparrow. They dropped Jack London at that point, and things are going along kind of okay, but it's still pretty regionally successful and not at a major level yet. By the late 1960s, the band relocates one more time from New York City to Los Angeles, California, starts playing places like the Whiskey A Go-Go alongside the Doors and Moby Grape, and commutes regularly to San Francisco from LA to play regular gigs at the Avalon Ballroom. They also changed their name from the Sparrows to Steppenwolf, and their debut album on RCA becomes one of the most significant releases of that year, altering the landscape of hard rock music. And it begins to kind of take music in a new direction that hadn't previously been explored before. And the group's first two efforts are monumental records for the change in new sound. It introduces Steppenwolf to a more international audience, and they're starting to take flight. And things start happening for the band, and they start to become more and more important. And as they say, the rest is history. John Kay. By that point, one of the Edmonton brothers had renamed himself Mars Bonfire. So if you see songwriting credits for Mars Bonfire, that is, I believe it's Dennis Edmonton. So there you go. That is the history of the Steppenwolf and how they became a band from a little town in southern Ontario called Oshawa. And they ended up in LA as one of the most important and iconic bands of the late 1960s. So I hope you enjoyed that look. I did get an opportunity to get some material from John Kay at one point, so I'm going to show you some of that next. So back in 2010, I actually got in touch with John Kay, and he sent me some material from my collection. He sent me an 8x10 signed by the band, which was cool, and also his book. And inside the front cover, he was good enough to autographed this, and it's a great read. It's a great history of the early band and his days in Steppenwolf and the whole career that was John Kay's life in music. It's quite a good entertaining read. The little band from Southern Ontario that makes it big in Los Angeles and is hanging out with the Hells Angels and has come a long way from pretending they were a British beat group. I hope you enjoyed that look at Steppenwolf's career, and you know, today, Magic Carpet Ride, Born to Be Wild, still two songs that are staples on classic rock radio and really are very important in the development for hard rock and heavy metal at the time. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much for all of the views and the likes and the subscriptions for the channel. This is week 6. Couldn't be happier with the response so far. Keep it coming and I'll do the same. And keep on collecting.